Today we will talk about color tones, tonal study, and perspective. And of course we'll paint. Hi guys, I have this reference of a photo which I made several years ago, and I wanted to paint it for a very long time, but somehow I didn't. So today we will try to do it right. Let's get on with it. As I said before, we start with a tonal study. Tonal study doesn't have to be very precise. It doesn't have to be painted on a good paper. It has to be painted on a scrap of a paper, be very much rough, and only give you an understanding of tones of your future painting. That's basically it. Once we're done with it, let's get on with our painting. But as you can see, I pre-drew the scene because it's very important to understand the perspective. Rails all come together in one point, and it's very important to understand that point and be able to draw it with your mind. I start with wetting the paper. It's wet on wet technique for bigger details, for the background and so on. It doesn't have to be precise. When you put the paint on a wet paper, it doesn't stay, it spreads. It basically just keeps the color in the area. It doesn't give you precise contour. And it's good because this way we can draw fuzzy backgrounds, we can draw the places where the future images will be. I start with flooding the whole areas with different tones, and our tonal study helps me with that, because this way I know where it's going to be dark, where it's going to be light, and I don't make stupid mistakes. I draw in impressions. You don't have to be precise here, as you should understand, like watercolor is not about photorealistic painting. It's about impressions. How do you feel about the scene? What exactly you want to imagine when you look at it? The area started to shape up. You can see I draw behind the rails. Since I'm working on wet paper, it doesn't end up well in all areas. I start seeing cauliflowers. That's not a good sign, because that's not what I intend to have. it's time to dry my painting soon. Once dried, we can continue. Now we are absolutely safe to draw over existing paints without a fear that they will mix together or create backgrounds. You also should have noticed that I am correcting the original picture because I made the bottom rail too wide. I don't want that. I feel like it should be smaller. There is nothing wrong with it, because you should understand that we are not drawing a precise image or from the reference photo. This doesn't have to be precise. It has to reflect an idea about the picture. If you remember, I wasn't very precise when I drew a tonal study, and I'm not going to stay that way on actual painting, because that's not what my intention is. I'm working in layers. You can see that I already put several layers on top of the rails, and now I'm putting layers of shades on the actual stairs, and you will see that I'm doing this over and over again until I'm satisfied. You cannot really be very precise on the first layer. Well, some people do, but that's not what most of the people do. So basically they put the layer and then they wait when it dries or when they see layers around, and then they understand that, okay, relatively this layer should be a bit darker, so then they wait until it dries and they put another layer on top of it, and that's totally fine. That's actually what watercolor is about. Now you can observe how I draw smaller details behind the rails. And maybe I'm making a mistake because they don't look too much connected. I'll have to do something after that to make them connected. You may have noticed that I am using this technique called negative space painting. So I want to draw a leaf and my background is already green, and I want to put a shape around that leaf. So instead of drawing the leaf, I am drawing around it with a shade. So my leaf becomes a negative space because I don't draw it, I leave it empty, and the shadow around it gives it shape. That's called negative space. I'm using this several times here on the picture. Right now I'm just making passing remarks regarding different techniques. This particular guide is not for specifying all those techniques. We might need a series of separate videos about each of the techniques with some slower and more thoughtful examples to understand it properly. Now I'm making impressions of the foliage in the background trees. That's what watercolor is best with, to make an impression of stuff. You don't have to draw precise details. That's not what watercolor is about. See, I'm making another layer and another layer and another layer until I see that they are relatively aligned to each other and they are dark enough to correspond to the light areas. I'm painting a dark shade under the stairs. And under the rail posts. It's very satisfying to see how they become 3D. And now we start with a rigger brush. I love that brush. That brush helps me with branches and smaller trunks of trees, and that is specifically expressive because it doesn't follow exactly what you want to. It doesn't follow exactly what you want it to do. It does its own thing, and that's the best about it. Painting grass with it is just amazing. I think it's time to draw a bigger tree behind the rails. It's not just to follow the reference, because like you remember that I mentioned that I've made a mistake by not connecting the areas in gaps behind the rails. Now, once I drew that trunk with branches, it became connected. It's very satisfying to see that, because before that different tones at different sides of the rails sort of make them disconnected. Now they connected again, and now it's even more 3D than before. Now we're painting some leaves in the foreground. It's a very satisfying activity, honestly, and the rigger brush is just awesome for that. Now I want some graphical noise, and you can see that I'm splattering the paint and spreading it a little bit. It's also a widely used technique in watercolor. I feel it's time to draw another trunk behind to create even more connection. Awesome. More leaves. And finally, never forget this signature. And that's it, folks. Now you have to remember to pull off tape properly. Be very careful to not damage the picture. And we're done. Congratulations. That concludes our little session for today. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next week for more inspirational painting.